Welcome to the DMF. I am your host, Justin Yance, and today I have a special guest, Stephen, fiction and nonfiction Atomic Readers at Atomic Readers on Instagram. We have a fascinating conversation about books and topics of the such, and enjoy. Okay, I have a special guest with me today. I have Stephen from Instagram at the Atomic Readers, and thank you for coming on the show. How are you doing?
Hey, Justin. Yeah, I'm doing great. We talked
Awesome.
about before where a little bit of COVID floating around at the moment, but
Yeah,
it's good to get that out of the way. But yeah, great to be here.
yeah, we're all gonna get it. I mean, unfortunately, it's just kind of a thing that's just happening. Um, so tell me a little bit about like Instagram. How did this come about? Like, is this something that came from the pandemic? Or is this something that you've always wanted to do? How did this start?
Yeah, like I'll probably give a bit of a background, I guess, of where reading has been for me in my life, at least. And um, yeah, like reading is one of those things that I've been doing probably solidly for maybe the last 25 years. So I've
Mm,
always been a big avid reader, and it would have started really around when I was in school. So I was very lucky to go to a school, which it was a public school at the time, but they offered classical studies, which was quite unusual for that kind of school, which meant it was an opportunity to study like Greek and Roman classic history and everything behind that, both the literature and the art and architecture as well. And so from there, I just managed to pick up a couple of really great teachers along the way. So for me, they'd always exposed me to really great books. And I was very lucky from a very early age to have been exposed to some of the greats and some of the classics. And I've always felt like I feel some people, when it comes to reading, need to try and have similar beacons or people to push them in the same direction. And it probably just took me too long to actually create the Instagram page because I've been reading for so long that
mm.
one day I was just sitting there and I just thought to myself, surely I should put out something about either my book collection or my passion and then help to try and guide other people in that direction. And I've always had that. Like people have always come to me and said, like, what books would you recommend or what are you reading? And that's where it was born from. I just said, yeah, let's jump on Instagram. Let's set something up. Maybe in my naivety, I didn't know what the market was like for it out there. But then it turned out that there were, multiple different accounts out there who were doing the same thing. But that's where it came from. It was really just a desire to try and help people out in the same way that I'd been guided by some great teachers along the way.
Interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit on some of your teachers? Like what some of the things they may have taught you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think the main one was just instilling a love for reading and curiosity and open-mindedness. So they always had a great base or footing in the classics. And you can look back over the history of time and some of those books, like, the older they are, the better they are in some regards. And you can go back and look at, I think I'm a massive fan of the Odyssey as a book, which is, the basis really of Western storytelling. Like that's where that comes from. And even films and everything will follow that basis of how that structure is laid out. So I think it was just to try and promote that open-mindedness to like follow the classics or the great books and to be very, and this is something I've learned along the way as well, is to be very careful with what you let into your mind. Because the body is very similar in terms of diet, like be careful what you eat. The mind is the same, like, and
Yeah.
I think people are probably a little bit reckless sometimes in terms of what they let in, and what you let in is what's going to come out. So they always said that diet of classic, strong, excellent literature as a foundation. And obviously they were quite, up to speed in new age as well. So they would have focused on new books that came out. But it was always just that thing of like these guys, if you go back to whether it's great philosophers or great historians, like they seem to understand the world in ways that we're only coming to now. And you'll see that saying in the interest now with Stoicism as an example, where that has really, has a second life. And a lot of what those guys wrote, you're talking, 121 AD, and they're still carrying forward that brilliant message that they had, and it's more relevant now than ever. So I think those teachers had an understanding that like those ancient authors seem to understand something about humans and human nature that was worth reading. And that
Yeah.
was where I got that basis of reading and knowledge.
Yeah, no, I mean That's fascinating that you had a teacher that like really could guide you through that. I mean, I can't really point to a teacher for myself that really, did that. It kind of just like I really started just like really delving into it for me when the pandemic happened. Like that just kind of just forced me. And I took a class and I was reading all these fascinating books and seeing, and you're right, like the older the book is, the more you can see the parallels to what's going on now, because it's almost like a circle. It just
Mhm.
everything just goes full circle. Um, you kind of already answered this, but I'm just curious. Is there like a book that kind of changed your life? I mean, you kind of said it with the Odyssey. Was that it?
I, I probably wouldn't say, I don't know if that was like a life changing. I guess sometimes there's a distinction maybe between books that have over time changed your life and then maybe
Mhm.
ones that change on a single moment. So I wouldn't say the Odyssey maybe changed me in a single moment of time. I could pick out one or two books that did that. And
Mm.
there's one in particular, and I recommend it to everybody. I haven't seen it anywhere, and I should put it up on the page. But yeah, I'll just give you a story. I remember currently I work for Facebook.
Mm.
So I've been there for the last 5 years. And I remember when I joined, it was a totally different environment to anything I'd worked in before, in terms of how smart the people were, in how much they would challenge you, in how competitive the environment was. And there was somebody that I was working with there who I just didn't really get on with at the time. So it would have been a challenging peer relationship. And I remember I was a manager at the time, and Facebook offered these external coaching courses that they would do. So you could go to an external coach, you'd get 6 hours with them, and they'd help you through like management, dilemmas, or how to be a better coach or how to be a better manager. And so I remember going to, it was a woman at the time, her name was Carol. And I went to her during this period where I was having like that difficult relationship with a coworker. And I had sat down and said to her, look, can you just listen to where I'm at? I said, we're just new. We've never met before. I'll just talk about this for a bit. And after 45 minutes, can you tell me what you think? And so she said to me at the end of the session, she said, do you want to honestly hear what I have to say? And I said, yeah, that's why I'm here. And she said, I think you're limited in your thinking. And so that to me was like, I'd always tried to pride myself on having like as open mind as I can. And if I'm facing a difficulty or a challenge, to like be as open-minded as you can and face it head on, request feedback. And I just thought it was interesting that I'd met someone for 45 minutes and she thought that already. So clearly something I was doing, saying, or thinking was limited.
Mm.
And I thought that was fantastic feedback from her, even if it stung at the time, like I have to be honest.
Yeah.
And she said to me, I think there's a great book you should read that would really help you. And she said it's called Leadership and Self-Deception. So it's not one that I was familiar with. It's written by the Arbinger Institute. So I feel like it's probably a collection of authors. And it focuses on a concept called being inside or outside the box. So usually what people try to do because it feels good is if you're having a difficulty, say, with somebody else, you're looking for reasons to be right. And that's focused on by looking at things that you think they do wrong. So, for example, if I thought you as a podcast host were the type of person who interrupted me all the time, which you're not, and I said, I just sat there and waited for you to interrupt me so that I could turn around and go, see, you're right about him. He does interrupt you. And am I so right? So I can reinforce my own viewpoint and I feel really good about it. And that's actually called being inside the box. And so that book, it's told as a fable, which can be a bit cheesy sometimes. Some people don't necessarily like fables, but if you take the underlying message from it, it really helps you to address those thoughts or those behaviors that you might have where you're actively looking to prove yourself right, because it creates a terrible cycle and a loop. And honestly, that was one for me when I read it, that I was like, wow, yeah, that's what I was looking to do. Like, and it was more a case of then trying to focus on my thoughts and my behaviors rather than somebody else. And I felt like that really helped me address that particular situation. So if I think anyone should read that, the leadership bit knocks it off a bit because I think people think they need to be in that kind of position, but anyone could read it.
I just want to interject. I mean, that's amazing. First off, the fact that Face It book, Facebook gets such a bad rap today where they don't realize, some of the things they're doing. I think that's great that they give you external coaching, just a little bit of that. I watched the film, the show Billions, and they have somebody that kind of does that. And I've always thought that that was a great idea. And the fact that, they are actually doing that is great because her 45 minutes, in some ways changed the impact of your life because she introduced you to another way of thinking. And you were using the example, if you started this podcast, you're just waiting for me to interrupt, it would become almost a self-fulfilling prophecy for you. And this book, which I don't know if I've heard about it, but it sounds fascinating, Leadership and Self-Deception. Um, it that sounds, and you said that it's like fables, so that reminds me of it kind of reminds me a little bit of The Alchemist, where it's kind of teaching
Mm.
you through the through the story, but it's giving you those life lessons. That's just I mean, that's great. I mean, the fact that you were able to, to do that and go out. Is that a book that you like to come back to a lot?
Yeah, I've dipped into it. I think it's more where, from a notes perspective, I've probably siphoned out the best bits of it, so I
Mm,
could reference back. I think, given that it's a fable, there's aspects of it that you're probably not going to want to read a second time around.
mm,
Like there's personalized bits in it where, it goes into the person's home life and different things like that. But that's also useful because it does show what they try to address is the dynamic as well within a relationship. So it will be the person and their spouse or his wife, and that's kind of useful as well. I would probably more return to the highlighted bits
mm.
rather than the desire to sit down and read the actual book itself.
Now, are you somebody that do you like to highlight in the book? So that was another question I was going to ask you about. Is like sometimes I like the Kindle because it means I can have all the books right here, but I also like the physical copy as well. But you can also highlight in either one. Which do you prefer?
Like, I'm probably more tactile because I'm a little bit older. So I
Mm,
have that reference point for when I still have a vinyl collection. Like, I still love a book
oh,
collection. My CDs still sit out
wow.
in a box in a garage because I just, my wife was like, "Come on, just move on." But there's just something about some of them that, even the linear notes and stuff that you used to like, that was the great thing about CDs as well, where it felt like an event where you got it and you opened it up and the booklet had information and
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. Um, but in terms of the book itself, like, yeah, I think for me, it's probably a personal preference. I think for book reading or reading overall, I would just encourage people to get it wherever they can,
Yeah.
without me thinking bad of someone because they read a Kindle or because they should have a book. So if you're trying to get into reading, just like read it in any way that you can. For me personally, I prefer to have the book, but I do have a Kindle, because when you go away on holidays, sometimes you think you want a certain book, but when you actually get there, it's like it's nice to have the variety that goes with having 20 titles on the Kindle. And the Kindle as well, like, it offers some of the older stuff for free. Like, you can get some really great books that are in the public domain for free as well. So I think use the Kindle if you can. I prefer to sit down, highlight the book, and I take notes in a certain kind of structure as well. And I would transfer them digitally then after that. So I also find that reading and highlighting and then transferring it I do it to a G drive, actually reinforces some of it again, because I think there is some kind of science behind when you actually write something out. I think you've got a better chance of remembering it. And
Mm.
so I've often found that when I do that, it gives me that better way to do it. But yeah, I love to highlight. Some people, I think that's absolute blasphemy. How could you ever do that to a book? But
How dare you
how
hurt the
dare you? But
book,
the book
the
doesn't have
words.
feelings. I call it embellishment, to be honest with you, because I
Yeah.
think you're just highlighting the best parts. So yeah.
Yeah. Now you were going to mention, I think, a second book.
Oh yeah.
Well, we got, and I'm fascinated by this book. I'm going to find it. I'm going to track this down. I had no idea about this book. So yeah, tell me about what was the second one that you were going to tell them?
Yeah, there's a couple I have on the list. I think Man's Search for Meaning would have been. I mean, and it's not new to a lot of people, but in terms of the impact I'd probably give you a story of where that one was actually relevant to me. So I am originally an electrician in a past life. That's what I actually did. So in 2004, I would have done that for 4 years to become an electrician. And then timing, as it happens often, in 2008, the global recession hit. So they pretty much closed up all the building sites, took down all the cranes and everything that goes with that. And I kind of was faced with that dilemma of I'd bought a house in 2006. I had a pretty sizable mortgage. Now I had no job. And the thing that I just studied for wasn't wanted anywhere. So I remember being the second to last person on a very large building site where it just wrapped up, basically closed up the gates and said, like, see you later. Um, which was tricky, like in terms of like what direction do you go? Because it's not like the market was prosperous. There weren't any jobs. And this is what I had thought was the direction I was going to go in life. So probably between 2008 and 10, I just floated around trying to do any odd job that I could because it was that kind of an environment. Like there was just no work. So I got to that final point where I was working a night shift where and nothing against this because it just wasn't for me personally. If anybody chooses to do this kind of work, that's completely on them. I just wanted to do something that personally would be more challenging for me. At that point, it was a night shift from 10 at night till 6 in the morning. And you just go and rearrange shelves in a supermarket. And that was literally the only piece of work that I could get. And so I remember coming home. I would come home every morning and I'd had always have like one ice cold beer. And a documentary came on the telly about Viktor E. Frankl. So I didn't know who he was at all. And um, I went out, they talked about his book, Man's Search for Meaning. I went out and picked it up and I read it from cover to cover in one go. And there's that quote where he talks about like, if circumstances, if you can't change the circumstances, then you're forced to change yourself, basically. And so that was the spur for me to like propel my life forward and say, look, I invested all this time in becoming an electrician. It's not going to be, but I would love to move forward. And I wanted to, at that stage, try and get into tech companies. So it's a lot harder when you're sitting there. I didn't have a big CV at the time. Didn't have a lot of experience, but I just charted out a course and said, well, this is where I'm at now and this is where I want to be. And I just found that that book was inspirational because I needed to change something about myself. The world wasn't going to change to suit me. And evidently it wasn't because like it had gone into a completely different direction. So
Yeah.
I said, yeah, if I want to be what I want to be, then I need to sit down and do it and make it happen. And so I felt like that was a great catalyst of a book. And also just for his approach to things and how he took and found meaning from even that worst scenario. And it's also like a comparable book as well, where I look at it and think, well, that's where he was. And he had lost everything but his ability to have his own train of thought. And even in that scenario, he still found something from it or still found good. And so when I find myself in those tricky situations, it's like, well, I still have my mind, I still have my thoughts, and I still have my viewpoint on this. So I can control that. It's often the only thing you can control. And yeah, I just found that was just a great book on all levels. I mean, it's mind blown, really. Have you read it?
I have it.
Yeah.
I've got to delve into it. I mean, I've read a lot of quotes on it because I follow a lot of Instagram blogs on it, but that's just great that a book like that can create the catalyst for change in somebody. See, that's what I love about books is
Mm.
the openness. The 1 minute reader reviews on Abdi told me, it changes your perspective. I was using the word empathy, and I think he's right. It might be better to say the word perspective changes. You get it. You get a different perspective on something. Um, and you mentioned, not having a CV, but it reminds me of the book that the head of Twitter wrote, talking about how he didn't have anything before he went to work with Google, but he just you know got in there somehow. And I think people don't realize that it's not so much what's on your resume and what's on there. It's just going out and doing it, stepping forward. I know this guy is hated today, but I think this
It was a Jack
quote is
Dorsey.
um I think so. I'd have to go through all the books and see. um but there's a quote that Woody Allen says, and he says, you know, half of life is just showing up.
Mhm.
And I think there's something very true to that, because, you know, you just really gotta show up and move forward. And I like that. You didn't know how you were going to get there, but the how will present itself just by having the idea and going there. Um, that that's great. That is just um how long do you like to read? I'm curious about that. Like, do you
It depend honestly, it would just depend on, well, probably a few factors, like where's my head at the time when I sit down to actually try and read. Probably the complexity of the subject matter. I know some people say reading can be draining, and because it takes energy, but
Mhm.
I've often found the flip as well, where I find it like to be energizing, because I come away from it
Yes.
going like, if you're reading the right subject matter, a great example of that would be like David Goggins's book. I'm sure you know, It Can't Hurt Me, right?
I'm reading that right now. I just started reading it last night, and I was like, oh wow,
Yeah.
this is great. This
Yeah, no,
is
that's a serious kind of a book in terms of, like, when I read that, I'm like, get the runners on, or the trainers, as you would say, and I'm off out to at least attempt a big run. But like, I find that depends on the book and the author and the subject matter. Some of it can really pump you up or really get you thinking. Some of it can be heavy as well. But I don't know. I think the last book, I'm trying to think of the last book I read where I actually would have had to slow myself down nearly. I've only ever done it on one or two books, so it
hmm.
can vary. But let's say, I don't know if you've ever heard of one called Flowers for Algernon. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, it's a fascinating book.
That's an
Fascinating book.
it's an unbelievable book. But I came late to that one because I only discovered that one, like, I can't remember when I found it, but it was very late in life. And I
Same
remember when
here.
I picked it up and I started reading it, and it was a Friday night. I started reading about 8 o'clock, and I was 4 hours into it at that stage, like straight through. And I remember enjoying it so much that I actually stopped myself, because I said, if I keep going, it'll be 6 o'clock and I'll have finished the book. Like, that will actually happen. And it's one of them, yeah, where I actively slowed down because I
Yeah.
didn't want it to end. I thought it was
That's
that
how
good.
I felt with that book.
Yeah,
That's exactly how I felt with that book. I was like, oh no, it's almost over. It's like,
I
no,
know.
I want to enjoy this. Yeah, that is, I mean, just the way it's written, you know,
I
how
know.
you're seeing him progress through the words he's using. I mean, that the amount of thought that took to put that all through. I think that's, yeah, I think that's one of those books that like everyone should read at some point in their life. Is it just really just I don't know. I had that same feeling. Like now you talking about it right now, I remember that. I'm just like looking at him like, no, I don't really want this to end.
Yeah.
Let me just keep this here, because it was so beautiful and poetic. And I don't know. I really thought about it. It really made me think. It was like, you know, what if there was ability to do something like this in some ways, maybe not uh, to this level.
But no, I think
Yeah, that's
poetic
kind of
is,
how I feel.
poetic is a great description of it, because I found it to be that. Like,
Yeah.
on all the I can't, I'm trying to think back on characters I've been as emotionally invested in as Charlie, the main character. And even like you said, the way that book is written at the start, because I guess for context, for anyone who's not familiar with it, it is about a person who has a low IQ. And there's a scientific study that's done where Algernon is the mouse, and they increase the intelligence in the mouse. And then they're looking for a volunteer to do it on a person. And then Charlie's does the experiment, and his IQ becomes genius level IQ. But obviously, Algernon, the mouse's intelligence, starts to fade, and it becomes problematic. And then Charlie starts to fade as well. But the brilliant thing at the start of it, the way the book is written, it's like written as it reads as someone who has that low IQ. And even as he goes and he starts to understand and learn punctuation, and then punctuation comes into his diary, and
Yeah.
then all these other things. And like, yeah, I just found it fascinating because it follows a great classical, it follows a great, like, script structure as well. And when
Yeah.
you study story, I think, and I'm fascinated by story because I love it. but it hits all the markers as well in terms of he has a point where he has that point of no return. It has the three acts almost. It has everything that you would want in a story to try and engage it and drag it in, and then it leaves you longing at the end as well. That's where I've thought about that book so many times afterwards, and
Yeah.
that for me is like when people talk about why is reading good, because when you can find a gem like that and absolutely lose yourself in it, and then take so much away from it, I think that's great. And also it stands to the power of fiction, because I feel like fiction gets a bit of a bashing sometimes,
Mm.
and I do focus primarily on nonfiction on the page, but fiction gives you a feeling that and relatability, and it just hits you in a certain way that nonfiction doesn't. That's what I have found. And I think a great story, I mean, the point of a story writer is to elicit feeling or emotion. That's what you're there for. You'll generally rise and release tension, and then you'll elicit emotion. And I think that book does it like consistently across all scenes and all areas. It's brilliant.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. When I read books, I feel like I get more energy. I don't. I've read that. Yes, some people feel drained from reading, but for me, it like I don't know. It like wakes me up. I get like kind of the same high I get as doing a meditation, where it's just like I'm excited. Um, what advice would you give? This is something I kind of want to help people with. Is those that like haven't who want to read but haven't started to. Did you create like a habit to do it? Or was it already so instilled with you since you had it at, adolescence with, in school?
Mhm. Yeah, and I that's one of the things I like. I definitely don't want this to come across as like if you want to become good at reading or whatever
Yeah.
however you would define the term good. It's not
Yeah.
universal. If you want to be someone who enjoys reading and does it frequently, it doesn't mean that you need to spend 25 years to get to that point. It's not like that at all. But there's a couple of things I would look at. I think there's reading books and then there's applying knowledge, right? So I think it's one of the reasons why I don't do reading challenges as such,
Mm,
because it's a bit of a vanity metric.
yeah.
In terms of like how many books did you read this year? I would
Yeah.
be more inclined to like how many books did you understand and actually apply to your life this year would be bigger for me. So
Yeah.
I would say for people who are trying to get into it, I have found great success in short stories. If you can find a really good short story author where the book consists of like just great engaging ones. One I give you, if Jeffrey Deaver has a book called Twisted, and if you've never read it, they're all stories that have a twist at the end. So they're short, maybe anywhere between 10 to 30 pages, and then they have that great twist at the end, and the twist is addictive, like because something is coming, you just don't know what it is and when it is, and so you stick with it to get to it, and then he rewards you every time. And so I often find that like if you read, try and link it to a reward in some way. So I know people say like do something that you're very interested in. I think it's great to find an interest. I also think it's great to find a book that solves a problem. So if you can turn around and say, well, when I read, positive things happen, you're more, I think, more inclined and more likely to read. So I think if you could find starting off shorter, easier, digestible books that solve a problem, and then you've that positive experience to link it back to. So it's like, well, I have a problem, so I'm going to reach out for a book. And that's what I have in my mindset. It's like if I'm trying to solve a problem, I go to a book. And that's just by default because books have solved a lot of my problems. So I think if you can get into that space, it's really good. And maybe a book that might be useful if someone is trying to be, I'm just trying to think of a short book that solves a problem. Could be something like Eat That Frog, right? That would be a
Mm,
great example of Brian Tracy's, that classic about productivity. So if you wanted to be more productive, you could go out and read um, a bigger book, like maybe Atomic Habits, that would help you create, better habits, more productive and a better environment. Or you might find that Eat That Frog is like very short, concise, and to the point, but it offers a lot of functional things. And so maybe just trying to find some of those books that are shorter, that help you create momentum. And yeah, I always think of Jerry. I don't know if you've ever seen Jerry Seinfeld talking about how
mm.
he writes jokes.
Yeah.
Somebody asked him that before, maybe if you're familiar with that, where he talks about get a calendar, write a joke, and then X off the first box,
Yeah.
and then turn up tomorrow and X off, and then just never break the chain.
And that's why I like, the Kindle will kind of almost record what you're doing, and you could see how many days you've done that. So you can do that. Yeah, there's that. It almost goes into what you were saying with Atomic Habits. Another book I wanted to add that's actually short that I think would help a lot of people is Make Your Bed. It's a very
Oh,
short
100%.
book,
Yeah.
but it really, that one like kind of stopped me a little bit. I was like, it's so short, but it like really like it was like there's a lot to be said here for just starting the day with something as simple as that. And when he talks about how they're like he kept they kept falling behind, they had to do the circus, but he said what he found was even though they kept falling behind, they kept having to do extra work. The extra work made it so that eventually they just started surpassing everybody, because they had done that. So I don't think people realize that like putting in the work now will usually lead to bigger rewards. And if you can just start a little bit, and you mentioned a good book, Atomic Habits, and Eat That Frog. I mean, just just start, just go through it.
I think
um,
sorry, make your bed is a great call.
yeah,
I put up the hero code recently. That's his
yeah,
second book. I put that one up on the page recently, and yeah, I think make your bed is just it's just brilliant. It's full of like fantastic life lessons, and actually, I'm a fan of like those because that was a commencement speech, and you'll often find that some of those shorter books they seem to come from commencement speeches.
really, I
David
didn't
Foster
know that.
Wallace has another one which I put up on the page called "This Is Water," which is hands down one of the best books I've ever read. And so, yeah, I think those kind of shorter books that are resonant on a personal level, that are easier to read, like Make Your Bed is probably twice as long as This Is Water. But even at that, there's
Really?
still short books. There's still 110 pages,
Yeah,
just short ones. But yeah, David Foster Wallace, if you've never read that one, it
yeah.
starts off with two young fish are going by an old fish, and the older fish asks, "Hey boys, how's your day?" Um, and he says that it's just fine. And then he says, "How's the water?" And then the younger fish say, "What the hell is water like?" And it's the thing that sometimes surrounds you, but you lose sight of.
Awareness.
It's the awareness of life, basically, that you could be. In their case, they're floating through water every day, but they've lost sight of it. And at the same time, we're going through life every day, and we probably lose sight of what life is actually about. Um, and that's just a great book. You could read that book in like 30 minutes, probably. It's that good.
Wow.
And it's just impactful. Lots of really good messages.
I'm gonna have to read that. Do you how do you feel about speed reading and like people like Jim Quick who have started? I think speed reading in some ways is the wrong word to call it, because in some ways it makes it sound like it's like lazy. It's like, hey, you're gonna have to read the book, just but it's like it's not that. It's seeing more instead of like reading every word in your head, you're seeing it there and you're getting the image as opposed to like sounding out, which is kind of how we're taught, is to sound out like every word. But then to get to levels of speed, you need to kind of just see it, like almost like it's another form of awareness. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I recently picked up a book on speed reading that I haven't actually read yet. So
Mm,
I'm not going to give like a definitive
yeah.
opinion on what I think of it. I think the name could probably do with a change. I think speed reading puts lots of people off because I think there's a tendency to think it's like, let's just rush through this thing and get it out
Yeah.
of the way. Where, yeah, I don't know whether it's like optimized reading or something
Yeah,
different that you could
optimized
probably
reading.
put
That's a
like,
better
yeah. And
better word.
I don't mean that as a reflection of you. I just mean generally speed reading seems to have that bad reputation. But I think I'm probably the kind of person that like I'd love to know where I could leverage that somewhere else. So
Mm,
even if it was a case of it didn't help me to read to get through the books quicker, it's like, could it help me remember stuff elsewhere, or does it have a dual application that you could apply somewhere else in your life. I think that's what I would love to see. Does it have that? But look, my mind is completely open to speed reading at the minute. That's why I picked up the book. But I mean, I'd love to hear your opinion on
Yeah.
why it's good or why you think people should attempt it.
I mean, for me, I just find that you're able to, it's not so much that you're able to go through like the whole book fast, although that is a thing, but it also teaches you to speed up the brain so that you're not sitting there when you're speed reading. It's almost impossible to be like, drifting off. You can't
Mm.
really drift off if you're speed readings. You're so focused. The mind is going faster. Like it's not a technique I would say, you're going to go to sleep and let me speed read. It's because you're seeing all these things and you're taking it all in another chunk. And I think also, I'm not sure about this, but I think by doing that, it also helps you, disarms you away from the way you would think about it and see it more, as you said, an awareness,
Mm.
seeing it as a whole. But yeah, that's the thing that I like about it, is that it speeds up the mind in some ways. Because I believe reading is like the best exercise for the mind. There really is not, I think meditation and then speed reading, but not speed reading, reading in general is just like the best thing you can do. It just keeps you sharp. And
Yeah, I don't 100% agree. That sounds interesting to me. Like, because I think whenever you talk, when I've talked to a lot of people who struggle with reading, it always comes back to the question of focus as well. So it's like, how do I focus when I'm reading? And there's so many distractions there that can pull you off course. So what I like from the sound of speed reading, even though I'm not that familiar with it, is the fact that it could hold or pin your attention in some way. Maybe it just doesn't give you time to get distracted, and that's probably
yeah,
the power of it.
yeah, yeah, I agree. All right, this has been great. So I ask everyone this because I find with readers that we kind of have a routine in some form. So how do you like to begin the day?
Yeah, like I used to have a really great routine, and then I had two
Yeah,
kids, and then
yeah, yeah. No, it's hard.
they put that to the test. So no, I look, I and they really do though, because you've got the best laid plans until someone wakes up in the middle of the night and they're sick or they're this or they're that. So it's a nice complaint to have though, I'll say. But
Yeah,
for me, yeah, I think in terms of routine, I'm like an early bird. I don't know, there's just something to be said for getting up and getting after it while everybody else is asleep. It just feels, or while a lot of people are asleep. So
yeah,
really for me, it's just getting up and focusing on just a couple of the core things. I'm big on simplicity in everything that I do, and it's difficult and it's complex, but I think if you can nail simplicity, and there's a couple of good books on simplicity as well, but I just like to get up and do the simple things, which is you know um breathe, read, stretch, exercise. Like it's not going to differ a massive amount, I don't think, to what some other people who do it in the morning. And look, it's been documented in a whole host of books, whether I still think the Miracle Morning, he did well to turn that into a bestseller, based
mm,
on things that a lot of people have been doing. I know people have talked about like the 5 a.m. club and stuff before, but for me, it's really just to get up, be present, like show gratitude and be gracious for what you have. I know these sound like cliche things, like, but like they're the simple things in life, which is I got up this morning and I can breathe and I could walk down the stairs and I can read, and I'm really lucky to
you have running water.
have like
You have running water. That in some
uh,
countries, people
yeah,
could only dream of that. So it's like, I don't think people realize that, some of the amenities that we take for granted. It's like we have a place where we can put food so that it doesn't go bad. Some people don't have that, I mean, electricity, all these things are things to be thankful for. The fact that we can talk, you're in Dublin, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we can talk at the same time
yep.
in two different time zones. I mean, that shows just those things alone are things to be grateful for,
They
just
are honestly, like I just like I'm always banging on about this stuff, and like my wife would be sick of me, talking about it. But all the beautiful things are all around you, and like you just have to be appreciative of them. I think the water one is a great shout. I think if you looked at, I don't want to go off point on it because I will address the routine, but whether you ever saw that there was a documentary about the mind of Bill Gates, or inside Bill Gates's mind. I don't know if you ever saw that,
Is this
where
was this on like
it was
Netflix,
on
I think?
it was on
Yeah.
Netflix, yeah. And he had gone out to different countries in Africa to try and address like the water issues that are out there, and the sanitation issues in particular. And they're there with like latrine pits, like pits where you have to squat into the toilet and then it's emptied into a river where the kids are all beside. And so what he had gone out there was to try, and whether you're a Bill Gates fan or not,
Yeah.
it's a noble endeavor to try and use this technology to turn that waste into water. But even at that, like the fact that when you flush your toilet, like, and it goes somewhere and it's not going to kill your kids, or they're not going to die from some disease. I know it sounds extreme, but like I always think personally in life I've hit the lotto. Like I've hit the absolute jackpot in terms of the people I've been surrounded with, the things that I have in life, and how lucky I am. And I genuinely try to be as grateful as possible for that. So like gratitude is a big thing for me, where when I sit up, and I can, even when you can go for a run, we go for a run and then you come back and complain about how sore you are. Like it's not like it's an honor and it's a gift to be able
Yeah.
to even be alive to do it. So I'm not preaching at anybody. I'm just saying that like that's the kind of stuff I like to do. So certainly as part of a morning routine, I think gratitude would be big. And then yeah, just stretching and breathing and reading. Like I keep it really simple. I guess if you went back 1,000 years, they probably did the same thing in the morning. So
Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't, I don't think it needs to get more
What is
complex
it?
than that.
The Marcus Aurelius books that Ryan Holiday created, with the 56-5 meditation.
The Daily
I
Stoic.
have it. I haven't started that yet, but that looks like a really interesting, because it shows the parallels of how we are the same in some ways in yeah, how to start the day.
That's a
The
great
book
book,
that,
though, by the way.
yeah.
Yeah, like because you can just the Daily Stoic, like you can just dip in and out of that one. Like you don't need to have continuity, or you could skip it for a few days if you needed to. But they just have that single passage for every single day, and it focuses on a different
Mm.
subject. And yeah, I found that to be great. I have posted a couple of those passages up on the page a few times. Um, some are more resonant than others, but I think that's an excellent book.
Hmm. The book that I was thinking about was Things a Little Bird Told Me, Biz Stone,
Okay, haven't
where
read
he
that.
talks about, he talks about, going into Google and not having, resume or anything, but, having that intention. And I think, it's a little off topic from where we were, but, having an intention, I think, is the most important thing one can have, because it causes you to move forward. You don't know how you're going to get there, but it gives you the ability to go there.
Mhm.
One of the books that I was looking at here that I see you have is the Will Smith book that just
Oh
came
yeah.
out last year. Have you had a chance to read that? I haven't gotten a chance to read that.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through on it, and actually, I picked it up on Audible as well because
Mm,
the narration is really good on it. So it's funny you mentioned that actually because I have that book and I have a few copies of it as well that I'm going to give away on the page. But
mm,
I've always been a big Will Smith fan. I mean,
yeah.
something about his personality is just he's big, he's larger than life, but he's unbelievably talented and hardworking. Like that's the big thing behind him. And I think when you read through the book, he's got like a great set of ethics and values, and he's been taught it from a young age. And there's a great section in that book where he's building a wall. I don't know. Have you seen that bit?
No, but I've heard him talk about this story where he talks
Yeah.
about this. He's talked about that in interviews. I've seen. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
No, I just love that because I think it's basically a one foot in front of the other approach to things, which is how you get anywhere, really.
yeah,
And where he's trying to build that wall and he's so frustrated by the magnitude of the wall that he needs to endeavor on. But then he's
brick
they come
by
over and
brick.
said there is no wall. There's
Yeah.
just one brick, lay it really well, and then lay the next brick, and then lay the next brick. And so because I think and I found that personally, like when I was trying to transition into, say, the tech world or trying to get into Facebook, where if I had have been overawed by the magnitude of what it was going to be, if I had looked at the really, I think you need to look at the end goal, because you always have to have an end goal in mind. But then it's breaking that down into little steps. And that's why that Will Smith story resonated with me, because he was told, like, just focus on the one brick, do the right thing one bit at a time. And then it's like another one by Bill Walsh called, I don't know, Bill Walsh was the ex San Francisco 49ers coach, would have won maybe, I think maybe 4 Super Bowls with them. And he has a book called The Score Takes Care of Itself. So he would always say, like, don't worry about the score, because if you look at the game of American football is very similar to the game of life, then in that sense, you're just trying to get obviously 10 yards at a go. But in this case, you know, you need to hit the right things. You need to run your routes, as you would say over there. You need to carry the ball. You need to have your fitness. You need to have all the things that go behind it. And if you do all of them and just don't worry about scoring, but just worry about the execution in the right way, in a consistent manner, then if you do that really well and better than everybody else, then you are going to pick up more 10-yard plays than everybody. And if you just keep picking up 10 yards, you're eventually going to find yourself in the end zone. And you don't even need to worry about the end zone. You just need to if you just keep moving forward 10 yards at a time, you'll end up in the end zone. So I think that's what his point is behind that. And I find the same for life as well, which is like, you know, break them down into little bits, just understand where you want to go, and then just tackle it piece by piece.
And that's great. I mean, it shows how applicable games are to life, that they should, you know, just a little bit further here, a little bit further here, and get to here, and that's it. Most of the time, kids take up the competitiveness, but I don't think they realize the goal setting aspect of a game, of just, you know, I just got to keep going forward to win the game, you know.
Yeah.
Just like any even video games, Elon Musk has talked about, you know, how, you know, it's just, you know, if we could make learning, convince people more that learning was like a video game, they would be it, because in some ways it's almost in our nature to complete it, to get to the end, you know. You only really stop if doubt will come in. But if you just keep going forward, no matter what the score is or where you're going, you'll have at least finished it, you know.
Yep.
And
100%. And learning for me is like a fascinating topic. I mean, it's one you could delve into for a long time, but it's just funny when you look back on maybe things that you did in school that you did or you didn't learn, or why you didn't learn. And I'm just a big believer in people trying to drill down further on the things that they are passionate about. Like, I remember when I went into school and they would make me do like biology as an example. And I'd say, but like, I've no interest in it. Like, I understand that, like, it would be good to know things about it, but where you want people to really take things on board and to get engaged, if you give something that they're passionate about, or that they really want to learn about, and then you teach them in an engaging way, I think you would find the output of schools to be just monumentally different. Whereas when I went to school, it was like we would be given 9 subjects. You'd be spread thin across them all. You didn't like half of them.
Yeah.
And it's harder then to get into that environment consistently, where you want to start to learn and really engage. And it's the same with reading. Like, it's like drill down on the things that, like, you're really interested in, or that help you out or solve problems. And I think the same in school. It's like, if someone had just said, listen, what are the things, giving you an opportunity to explore your own choice rather than forcing it upon you, I think you'd find that people will be far more engaged. And maybe some people just aren't meant for certain things. Like, so I don't know why we need to box everybody into like one thing.
And that's my problem with school in general, is I feel like it forces people to be boxed in, instead of what school should be is developing a love for learning, whatever that may be. What is the thing that you want to learn about? Instead, like you said, we pick 9 subjects, push them down, and it's all spread thin. And I don't think at the end of the day, you're really developing, you know, you're not getting a full grasp of all the subjects. Some are just going to kind of fall by the wayside. And it goes more into control to me than as opposed to
Mm.
learning, because people see it as now it's work, and you associate reading with work and learning with work. And then people, just kind of want to just, when they're done with school, just, I don't want to do any of that. And it's like, no, you're always learning. That never stops. It might not be in the classroom setting, but you should always want to learn,
100%. Well, life is like, as soon as you close your mind off to learning, then like you're done, really,
Yeah.
because every person you meet presents you with an opportunity to learn. So if someone does something right, you can learn from it. If someone does something wrong, they're showing you by default the right way. Like, so you can always learn something from somebody. But I think as well, with that association in school, is that like that's where a lot of people stop reading as well, because they drop off because their association with reading is negative. It's just something that was forced on you. It was taught in a really poor way, and it's not engaging. Whereas, look, I'm not idealized enough to think we can just automatically change every school system in the world, right?
No, we
Like,
can't.
I mean, it's firmly entrenched, but I think giving people simple things, like maybe giving people more of a choice, or trying to explore what it is that you find interesting, to use that as a basis going forward. But I do understand that you need to do things in a certain way so that a school system can work. Like, it would
Yeah.
be naive to think otherwise. But yeah, I just think that's really important. And again, that comes back to a great teacher. I'm testimony to that. Like, I had a great teacher who, one in particular, would give me books all the time and introduce me to great books and great poetry as well. I was really lucky to have gotten to some great poets before I left school. And I think actually that's a thing where poetry is like, it's a dangerous word these days. Like, whoever wants to touch a poem, but there's some poems there where I could pick out that you could learn more from that one poem than you could from a whole book. And I just think, yeah, poetry is a fascinating topic and subject as well.
Can you recommend some poetry books, or how would you?
I'd probably pick a poem. I'd say if you could get into a couple of poems, then you might get into, an anthology of sorts. But there's two poems that always stand out to me. But one is called George Gray by Edgar Lee Masters. I don't know whether you've ever heard of this one, but it's part of what's called the Spoon River Anthology.
Yes,
So
yes, yeah, I
you
know
might
that.
have heard of that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, I
But
know that.
this book, or that poem, is 16 lines long. It's 127 words in total. And I get more from that poem sometimes than any book. And in it, he talks about how he's studied his life multiple times, and he looks at the piece of marble that is his life, and he sees it sculpted as a boat with a furled sail that sits in a harbor, right? So, and he doesn't think of it in terms of the boat has come home from his destination. He looks at it as in it's representative of his life. And he talks about how when love came, he was too scared. When opportunity knocked, he didn't want to embrace it. When all the things that came in life, he turned them away. And he is the boat that never unfurled the sail and sailed the sea. And so he talks about how meaning in life is the most important thing, of going out there and experiencing it and riding the sea and the waves and living that adventure. And just when you read that, it's the thing, sometimes poems can seem like they're, overly like difficult or hard to interpret. This one is really simple and clear. It's just a representation of his life. And when I read it, it's that reminder to like unfurl the sail. It may seem scary to do that certain thing that you want to do. I mean, I sat on that Instagram page for ages because of like, well, what if I put it up and it doesn't do well? Or like, what if someone doesn't like it? Or what if my content isn't any good? So what? Just do it. Like, no one's sitting there thinking about my content all day anyway. So it really doesn't matter. And you can try and improve on it from there. But I just, whenever I read that poem, or whenever I need a bit of a jolt to say, just live life. Like, this is short. This time span that you got right now is, it's so inconceivably small compared to the rest of the timeline of the universe, that like, just take a shot. And if it doesn't work out, it usually works out in the end. And if it doesn't, well, just try something else. But like that poem in particular just reminds me to just take a shot.
Um, tell me what is your like what would you say is your nighttime routine? I know we're gonna like switch. I'm trying to like shift the conversation to some simpler subjects because I just thought that poem was amazing. That is just the most um I can't wait to go look that up because I mean
Yeah.
that really that's from George Gray, right?
It's by Edgar Lee Masters, but it's called George Gray. So in that Spoon River anthology, you'll see there it's written about like a town, and it's different characters and different people. So yeah, it's well worth a read.
Yeah. Um, so yeah,
Like,
what is your like how do you calm down at night? Now we're just getting into like some simple things,
yeah.
you know. We watch,
Um,
we'll still get into deep things. It's almost impossible for us, but yeah.
how to calm down? That sounds like that's a deep thing, I think, as well for me.
Yeah.
No, look, I think it's really a case of I like to read in the evening. Um,
Yeah.
so that does help me to switch off. It also switches me on, but it'll switch me off. But I've been trying out like trying to do a new routine lately, which is just to in the evenings just to write a little bit more. I think that's good.
Mm.
I think sometimes you can write down your thoughts of the day, or if I'm trying to do, writing for, I'm going to start moving more into the YouTube space. So I'm just starting to write more of the like scripts and stuff that will go behind that.
Mm.
But I think it's really just trying to get rid of technology if you can. Like, I think going into the whole basis behind why, as humans, we sleep. So I don't know whether you've ever read Matthew Walker's book about sleep, why we sleep.
I've read Michael Brius's book. He
Okay.
helped me a great deal with sleep. But yeah, that's on my list. I
Yeah.
think I bought it. It was on sale, and I need to go
Brilliant.
and just read it.
Yeah. So look, maybe it sounds kind of dull and boring, but like I think the whole point of the evening is to try and get ready for sleep. And I think it actually takes more effort than you realize because we're so bombarded with so many different distractions. So it's really a case of like trying to cut out the blue light, trying to calm your mind down. I'll try and do some meditation in the evening. I'll try and do some writing. Basically, you're trying to, for me, it's just trying to flush out the stuff that's the residue that's still hanging around from the day, basically, and to try and give yourself a clearer mind so that like when you put your head down on the pillow, it should be to try and go to sleep, not to lie there and like stew on something or
Yeah.
think over all the things of the day. So like, what is it that can help you flush that out? And I used to stretch quite a bit in the evening as well. I found that gave me a real, I don't know, there's a nice high that comes off stretching sometimes.
Do you like to do yoga? Is that where your
Yeah, I
stretching
do.
routine comes from?
Yeah.
Cool.
So I'll do like a bit of yoga, or I might just do stretching. I guess it depends. Like I'll try and follow along with some of the Apple Fitness stuff because I picked up an Apple Watch recently, so I have that there.
Mm.
And even on YouTube, I mean, you can get free yoga stuff there, but it's really just stretching out the body and then clearing out the mind and just trying to calm down and relax. And I think trying to darken things down because I mean, when you look at humans and melatonin and all the things that we need to fall asleep. That's what I'm trying to do is prepare myself to fall asleep. As boring as that sounds, but it's difficult to fall asleep sometimes. Like,
Now,
um,
now you mentioned meditation.
yeah,
How do you like to meditate?
yeah. Look, I try to keep it simple. I mean, I've tried, transcendental meditation, and you'll try and do like the
Mm.
internal kind of chant or whatever. But at the moment, just in terms of keeping it simple, it's really just sitting there and just focusing on the breath in and the breath out. And I think sometimes meditation feels like it's probably one of these difficult, like, I mean, anything has layers of complexity to it. But ultimately, meditation is just allowing your thoughts to rise and fall and just breathing in and out, like, and not chastising yourself for anything. Like, it takes time to get comfortable with that. But like, you can't ever stop yourself thinking. Like, you're not made that way. So don't try to stop thinking. Just be at peace with the thoughts as they come and like learn to let them come in and out, and then just focusing on the breath in and out. And like, again, I'm a big person for simplicity, but I think meditation is kind of as simple as it gets, but can feel
Yeah,
difficult at times.
it really is. Last question. What movies do you like? Do you like films?
Oh, I do. Yeah. I'm not going to say I'm like a movie buff as such,
Okay.
but I guess maybe films are like art in terms of like I know what I like. I'm just big on. I can name out a couple of top like
Yeah.
5 films or whatever they are. Like,
Yeah.
but
Whatever.
number
Yeah.
one for me would be Mulholland Drive. So I'm like, don't know if David Lynch fan.
Great.
Are you?
Yes. Oh.
Oh yeah. Okay.
You were talking to like one of the biggest David Lynch fans. Yeah.
Also
Oh,
a great
that's awesome.
meditator as well.
Yes.
He is.
Transcendental.
Yeah. Transcendental.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
I love that. There's just everything about that film was just blew my mind because it's the only film I've ever watched where when I finished it, I put it straight back on and watched it till the end again. So like back to back, watched it in full because even I had it on DVD. That'll tell you how far back that goes. But the notes that come on the inside of that were
Yeah, I remember
clues.
it. Yeah,
Remember they were clues.
there
Like
were
they tell you, look out for the
clues.
ashtray or like. So I remember when I saw that, I was like, well, this is I've never seen that in a film before. And then when I watched it, and yeah, just everything from the twist in the middle that just like knocked me for six. And that Spanish version of Crying by Roy Orbison is just amazing as well.
Yeah,
And yeah, just the whole thing.
so good. That's awesome. You don't need to go any further. You've hit it with Mulholland Drive. That's the best. So how can people reach you?
Yeah, look, I'm Atomicreaders on Instagram, and like where I'm at with this one at the minute is just that's the starting point for me. I'm going to start moving over to YouTube because I find maybe one of the limitations with Instagram is, and you have to accept it, is that it's a short form content platform. Sometimes I don't know whether I want to summarize a book in 30 seconds. Like I think books often merit longer discussions, but that's not the format or the platform for it. So I'll move over to YouTube and start doing more. I'm going to publish a video soon. But yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, it's atomicreaders@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on Instagram. DM me. Lots of people DM me all the time with like different questions about like books and life and different things. So yeah, look, I love a conversation or have a chat. So if there's anything that you want to know, yeah, just reach out to me there. I'd be happy to help.
All right, man. Thank you so much for doing this. And yeah, we got to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'd love to. And you're doing a great job on the show as well. So thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. Okay, that about does it. I want to thank Stephen from Atomic Readers for the fascinating conversation. As always, you can find him at Atomic Readers, and he has a link tree there on his Instagram page. As always, you can find me at Justin Yance, and I will see you next time on the DMF.